Hi, this is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles, and I want to welcome you to another episode of Stories of the Supernatural. Wherever you find us, whether it's a video or podcast on your favorite platform, please like and subscribe to us so that you can get notification of when a new show is released. You can also find us on major social media platforms. If you go to miamighostchronicles.com, you can find links to the videos or MP3 files, which you can download and enjoy without commercial interruptions. If you're into classic horror, ghost, and adventure stories, I narrate Nightshade Diary, and you can find links at nightshadediary.com. If scary stories are your bag, and listening to encounters with cryptids, ghosts, dogman, and other weird creatures sends a shiver up your spine, then go to supernaturalstorytime.com for links to our weekly podcasts. Noteworthy news about the paranormal world, true crime, conspiracy stories, and anything that is just plain weird can be found at eerie.news or visit the Stranger Than Fiction Stories tab at miamighostchronicles.com. Please subscribe to my newsletter on SUBSTACK. Just go to mppellicer.com for a link. I want to thank you for being part of my audience, and I think you are all wonderful.
Happy Halloween, everybody. It's Marlene and Henry. Happy Halloween. Hit it. Wait, we only do this, of course, when it's Halloween. Otherwise, people think that you're nuttier than you really are. But anyway, guys, yeah, we're doing a pre-recorded because we're both under the weather a little bit. It's just one of those things. So we thought, you know what? In case we both go into coughing fits, I can edit it out. So, but anyway, happy Halloween to everybody. It's on a Friday, so I know there's going to be a lot of people partying out there. So if you don't catch the video now on its release, please come back and enjoy it. All right, I believe this is my 4th year or the 5th year that we've done this, and 5th, something like that. Anyway, here we are once again. Time flies when you're having fun, even when you're not. But yes, it's here we are coming almost to the end of 2025, and let's face it, I'll be honest with you. Even now, we were commenting on that. Now you even go to some of the stores, and the Halloween stuff is all gone, even though it's not the Halloween technically yet, and all the Christmas stuff is there. And it's like
tradition is gone.
Tradition is gone. Yep. So we keeping our own tradition, which is the show, and here we are. So anyway, I started looking, because I already did the, what's the history of or the meaning of Halloween, etc. Blah 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 blah. So I started, what? Let's look at some weird stuff. And one of the things that I found really interesting was the title of this year's Halloween show is called Voodoo Murders. And I started doing some research, and I realized that whenever any type of weird murder or death occurred, whether it was, sometimes it did have a flavor of voodoo, don't get me wrong, it did. And other times, but just the fact that it was weird or unusual, or there was something, the newspapers right away dubbed it voodoo murder. And I said, you know what, let's follow this along and see where it leads. All right, and it's really funny because along the way, remember, these are all true stories. These are not made up. These are true stories. I hold true to what was said, and I even researched beyond that what I could. And you meet characters, okay, that I was like, how's this? If I was a movie producer or a director, I'd say, I could make a movie out of this. This would be a great movie. Because these characters, again, even if they're like, sometimes, for lack of a better word, they're the villain. Or not the villain, but yeah, they're so interesting. And the best thing, of course, is that they were real, that you're like, and you were kind of a, you know what, but God, you're interesting. You're that type of person, Henry?
Yeah.
That sometimes, I'm sure everybody's seen series that you kind of like, not that admire, but you kind of look at the villain sometimes ends up being the most interesting character in the cast kind of deal. But anyway, they're human. Like all things, Now, the first story that we're going to go to on this, okay, and all these stories you're going to see, they all have happened like maybe around right after the turn of the century, and into the 1920s, 1930s, And of course, forensics is not what it is now. All right. So you're going to see that some of the things that happened, as a matter of fact, you're going to see on this first case, these cases that I'm going to talk about caused a change in the law. All right. Okay. Now, this first case, all right, it's out of I think was it New York or New Jersey? Let me take a look here before I get my stories. Okay, sorry, Philadelphia. It's Philly. It's 1903. Okay, and in 1903, there's an investigation that they were running what they called a murder mill out of Philadelphia. Okay, now the cost for knocking off a person was $100, which, by the way, back in 1903, $100 was quite a bit of money. All right, and once they got into the investigation, it would be found out that this thing had been going on for about 30 years. So in around since the 1870s, they had been doing this murder contract, assassin thing, but there's a different angle to it. And this was under the nose of the authorities, which makes you wonder, were the authorities, how's this? How hard were the authorities looking for, when you see sometimes that, how hard were they trying to really find these people? Okay, because you're going to see this was all happen. As a matter of fact, you're going to see really what led to this, these crimes, because it's plural, more than one, was not even the police, which tells you, was anybody being bought off? What do you think, Henry? Never heard of that, right?
No.
Was the insurance companies. But it was one of those things that where one door opens, another comes open. But this is the initial thing was, okay, so it starts to unravel, okay, where there's an investigation, and it's spurred by the Philadelphia's coroner, all right, and this is on October 1902, and what happens is there's 3 children that die in the Williams family, all right. Now, what's really weird and what catches the coroner's attention is that all 3 kids were insured, life insurance thing, which is unusual because usually the ones you insure would be parents, maybe elderly people, but children you would think are going to be alive. But anyway, it's December 1902, all right, 2 months later, and John Williams and his common law wife, Emma Kecklin, they're charged by a coroner's jury with the murder of their young daughters, Anna and Josephine, in order to collect insurance. Now, they, of course, because see, remember, back then, the coroner was the one that would bring it to a coroner's jury, and from there it would go forward with law enforcement. And they basically, the finding of the jury, the coroner's jury, allows them to exhume the bodies. All right, so they find arsenic in the children's body. All right, now at that time, they had three live children, a 6-year-old boy, a 4-year-old girl, and a baby that was not even a year old. All right, so like I said, this was in December. 2 months later, February of 1903, a judge, he allows the bodies of Anna, Josephine, and a 3rd daughter, by the way, that the coroner had not looked into. Apparently, I think that was the first one that died, to be exhumed from Oakland Cemetery in Philadelphia. And when the coroner, by the way, when he's doing his investigation, he finds out that the parents had bought what they called powders from a guy named, last name of Horsey. And he was called a voodoo or an herb doctor. All right, this is what they called him back then. So this coroner, basically, he does the legwork for the authorities. All right, and this inquiry, again, when they exhume the kids' bodies, they find there's arsenic in it. It's like, okay, insured children, 3 dead. Okay, they're at a 50% thing. They had 6 kids, 50% of them are gone. And I understand that back then, infant mortality was very high and children died easily from, just different things, or there was, stuff that happened. So anyway, this inquiry leads them to go to the voodoo doctor's home. Okay, now there's a private investigator who, by the way, has been hired by the insurance company. Again, here's the police kind of dragging their butts on this. So he goes in there and he passes himself as a client. Okay, and what also got the insurance companies to get into this beyond the coroner is that all of a sudden they're looking at all their records and they're realizing, man, we've got a bunch of deaths of people in this same neighborhood. Wait a minute. You know, because in and of itself, the coroner's thing was just for the investigation of the Williams kids. And that made, because remember, insurance companies are going to try to do everything they can not to pay up. So they say, wait a minute, let's look at our records. And they realize, man, we have a bunch of deaths probably out of proportion to in that general area. So they hire this private detective. He goes there, passes himself as a client to Horsey, the voodoo doctor. And they find out that this guy, his name was either Horsey or Holsey or Hulsey. It's real difficult. And he was a self-described voodoo doctor. He was illiterate. He was an illiterate guy, but he had somehow developed this huge following. All right. Now, this racket covered murder for money, murder for hate, murder for illicit love, murder for social position, or murder for meal revenge. In other words, if you came to the voodoo doctor, whatever your gripe was with somebody, he had a solution for you. It was like, kill him. You know, usually, in other words, so by the end, now remember, a lot of these murders, they weren't really able to prove it because I think of the length of time. But at the end of this investigation, they had at least 34 murders that were revealed by the investigation. That means probably there were more. Okay, now, when this guy goes in there, all right, he passes himself off ultimately like he's telling the doctor, hey, you know what, I think, you know what, I need, at first it's like a woman problem kind of deal, right? Because he's doing a pretty good job. He's trying to like not come in there, hey, I want to kill somebody. He's telling him, oh, I got woman problems, somebody that I love, or something along those lines, right? And down the line, I guess somehow or other, he introduces the subject of, well, the truth is, what I really need to do is I really need to get rid of the woman. So, in other words, he kind of leads the doctor to what he really wants. Because let's face it, you know, something simple is not going to be a problem. That's that thing about killing somebody. That's hey, take it easy, Slim. I mean, anyway, as you know, I've got my babies here. Okay, so now when they go in there into his house and they start poking around, they find has sold a large quantity of arsenic. Now, one thing, back then, arsenic was used a lot for rats. Like people in their houses, it was common to have arsenic at their house. They would use it for rats and for pests. And in other words, this
it's undetectable.
Right. But in and of itself, it wasn't like an uncommon thing. People would buy it for household purposes, like to kill mice and rats and all this. The thing is, though, that this guy had sold a large quantity of it. He also solicited, and he got around and he entered into that contract with that private detective to murder a woman for $100. And of course, this was the same motivation for all the other contracts that he had, was that they would come to him directly and say, I want to kill this person. And that a lot of times, believe it or not, these people had insurance policies. All right. So sometimes there was an insurance policy. Other times it was revenge. But it just so happened that a lot of them had insurances. Now, the cases involved insurance payoffs, what they call disturbed domestic relations, which, you know, a couple that hated each other, or the interference from a next kin.
It's funny because whoever went to him first kills the other.
Yeah, kills the other. It could be the mother-in-law. It could be anybody. All right.
First come, first.
So in other words, if there was somebody that you wanted to get rid of, This was like your neighborhood hitman, kind of.
You better get there first.
So now, this is the thing also. Besides selling the arsenic, he would give instructions on how to pull off the poisoning. This is what he would tell his customers, quote, first, give doses of the poisoning, then send for a doctor. He gives the ailment some big name. Give another dose. Then, but stop after that and let the doctor think he's treating patient properly. In other words, let the person get better. Then, after a while, begin again and don't stop until death takes place. The doctor will make out a certificate. The coroner is never notified and he knows nothing about it. In other words, what this guy is saying is, you know, once you get the doctor involved and treating this person, that's why you pull back from the poison. They're going to say, the person got better, I'm treating them. But if down the road, you know, they start having these little symptoms, because this doctor's going to say, oh, the person that had whatever.
One of the biggest reasons that the people used arsenic then and then later on is because, not because they wanted to kill people, but because arsenic doesn't have no odor or taste.
Right. Well, when people ate it, sometimes it didn't have but it could. But
yeah. So if somebody wanted to use it for personal use, yeah.
You know, they would, yeah. Well, and again, it was common. It was like if somebody found you with arsenic at your house, it wasn't like, oh, what are you doing with the arsenic? It's like, no, I'm killing pests that I have around the house. So this guy is Dr. Horsey, the voodoo doctor. He's got it worked out. He's telling you, this is how you're going to dose them. You're going to call a doctor. Because remember, sometimes people that were given this arsenic, sometimes they even had they already had some illness going on. Maybe not enough to kill them, but depends, all right? So you bring in the doctor. Stop giving them the poison. They get better. Then you start giving it to them again. Bottom line, and you know what? He was right. A lot of these doctors never suspected poisoning, all right? And once the person expires, they would be the first ones there. Fill the death certificate. That's it. Goes away. The court. Nobody comes and looks at it. Why? Because they were under a doctor's care. So I mean, I'm telling you, this voodoo doctor had things sewn up. Okay, now one of the things that they talked about was that his specialty, though, was to be clearing up relationships done by deliberate murder, with the insurance feature as a secondary factor. In other words, everybody would think, oh, it's always about the money. Not necessarily. Sometimes people would come to him, and that makes me think, I wonder if when people would come to him and say, hey, I want my husband, my wife, my mother-in-law, my father, my mother, my whatever, I'm surprised he wouldn't even tell them, how have you considered getting them, putting out an insurance policy on them? I would not be surprised. And one thing, his price was always $100. Okay, now when they go into his house and they're going through all his things. Now remember, I told you this guy is illiterate. So what they find is he's illiterate but smart at the same time. Makes you wonder if this guy would have gotten some type of education. Wow. He used a code of numbers and hieroglyphics to refer to his customers and a list he kept. In other words, it was indecipherable. He made up his own numbers and codes and hieroglyphics, little symbols that only he understood. So when they're looking at this list, they have no idea what's he saying. And it was like an unknown language kind of deal, for lack of a better word, because he was illiterate, so he just made his stuff up that he understood. So now when they go there, they seized a wagon load of bottles, drugs, instruments, and other paraphernalia. And now, this is another thing, Henry. What do you think? Guess what? The majority of his customers were women.
Yeah, what is it? The revenge of women scorn kind of thing?
Well, not even scorn. It's like, okay. By the way, women both married and single. Now, there you go. Talk about the fair sex.
Never mess with a woman that knows how to use arsenic.
Yeah. You think? So anyway, there were they found what they called 2 boxes of rough on rats poison. That was the brand name of the poison that they had at that time. And now, among all the other things, they found that he kept authentic blank death certificates and had signed them as Dr. George Horsey, MD. And in other words, they never figured out where was he able to get authentic blank death certificates. Remember, at that time, only real doctors could sign off on this because basically you would be saying this person died on this date from this cause, blah, 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 blah. Again, by the end of this, eventually he goes to trial, but they estimate he was responsible for countless deaths after running this mill, remember, for 30 years. Okay, now, what is it? The last one in line is the one that always gets snagged. One of his latest clients was a lady by the name of Catherine Danz. She's arrested in March 1903. This is a month after finally goes to a judge. And she's charged with poisoning her husband 18 months before. Now, he's being held as an accessory to the crime. And they, of course, they come and they arrest her based on information he gave them. In other words, they couldn't figure out. In other words, he talked, and I'm sure they squeezed him like, hey, if you don't want to be in big trouble, you're going to give us information. So she was the last one on his list, and he talked and said who she was. Now, her husband was a guy named William Danz, and he was a butcher. Lived at 2625 North 4th Street in Philly, just in case you live there. That's a weird place. Anyway, in April of 1901, he gets sick, and there's a doctor who's treating him for rheumatism of the heart. And 2 months later, he dies, and the death certificate lists the cause of death as paralysis of the heart. Now, less than a month later, July of 1901, the life insurance company pays out $3,000, which was the amount of his insurance. Again, remember, this is 1901, 3,000 is a lot of money.
It's like 60,000.
Right now, while this is going on, even now the police are asking physicians in the northeast section of Philadelphia who signed death certificates within the past 2 years that specified heart lesions as the cause of death. The reason I think they did this was such a general kind of like cause of death that it could be anything. Heart lesions, I don't know. So they exhume this guy, Mr. Danz, Catherine's husband, and they find that he had died of arsenical poison. In other words, they found arsenic in him. So she turns around, Catherine Danz, and she's telling the police that she gave her husband drugs from the voodoo doctor, from Halsey or whatever, in order to cure her husband from the drink habit, since he was a hard drinker. They had 2 children, a son 18 and a daughter 19 at this time. In other words, they had already been married like 20 years, right? So she goes to trial at the end of March of 1904. And when she goes to trial, they're trying to make him, hey, we need you to come and testify at the trial. But he appears to be mentally broken. And because at this time he had already gone to trial and they had sentenced him to death, even though he's an accessory. And he appeared to be mentally broken, so he couldn't testify to take the witness stand, which eventually he does. And again, he had been charged as accessory to the murder of William Danz. Now, Mrs. Danz, she shows up every day at the trial, and she's dressed all in black. She's got gloves, a heavy veil, like somebody in mourning. And she pleads not guilty. And what's really funny is up to then, all her neighbors, she had this excellent reputation. This lady was not somebody who was like, oh yeah, I could see her doing something like that. So she had an excellent reputation. Now, during the trial, it comes out that the voodoo doctor tells her, bring 3 hairs from your husband's head. And he wound these around the stick. He gave the stick and the hairs back to her with instructions to bury them in a spot over which her husband passed daily. But coincidentally, during those days, he gets stuck with a bout of rheumatism, and he did not walk around as he usually did. Now remember, all this time, she's saying, I'm doing all of this because I want him to stop drinking. So now in the middle of all this, they find out that the life insurance policy is payable not to Mrs. Danz, but to her mother. In other words, his mother-in-law. All right, Mrs. Groff. Now, she had loaned him, the dead guy, a larger amount than $3,000, okay, for him to go into business, and he failed, and he never gave her the money. So she was the one that paid the insurance premiums during the time that he was alive. And she, by the way, she wasn't wealthy, but even though she lived with them, she was known that she owned like various properties in the area. So the mother-in-law, she gets the money. Now, at the end, Catherine Danz, she is found guilty, and she appealed the conviction in April of 1905. Remember, we're talking now 2 years down the road. She goes to the Supreme Court in Pennsylvania. By a vote of 5-2, they decide she's got to hang, right? And in 1906, he's found guilty of the murder in the first degree of George Danz, and he's supposed to hang on March 26th of 1906. Now, at the last minute, they commute the death sentence, and instead, they say, okay, we're going to give you life imprisonment. Instead of both of you hanging, we're going to you're going to spend the rest of your life in prison. Now, fast forward 5 years, 1911. The Board of Pardons grants her a full pardon, right? All this time she was staying over at Eastern State Penitentiary. And when they let her out, she comes dressed, and she leaves again dressed all in black veil, black dress. By the way, she gets the pardon 10 years to the day her husband died. She's 56 years old, and she tells the press afterwards, that when her husband's dying, he begs her forgiveness for abusing her. And one time he struck her mother, or his mother-in-law, and blinded her in one eye. And he was a violent guy. He had thrown their son out of the house. And she says, I told him that I wouldn't forgive him. And her daughter that was there also didn't forgive him. So I guess this guy was a real piece of work. And she had told newspaper reporters that after her pardon, that her mom had died 2 days before she was sentenced. So I guess this old lady, the grief was killed her. And in other words, that this whole thing had ruined their lives. Her mom died before she got sentenced. Her son left and joined the military. And her daughter trained to become a nurse and moved to Illinois, which, by the way, this is where she was going after her release. Now, what happened to George, the voodoo doctor, nobody knows. I think he was released if he was still alive, because you really don't know how old this guy was. All right? Now, you remember the original Williams family that was the one that got this whole thing going? Believe it or not, way back then, it wasn't at the end, but Emma, for some reason, the one that ends up going to trial on this is not her husband, it's her. Emma Williams, the mom. She's acquitted after experts testified that embalming fluids were used on her daughters, which contained arsenic and antimony, and that there was no definite proof she had poisoned them. In other words, they could say the arsenic in the children's body was due to the embalming. Now, here it is. Due to these cases, bills were proposed to use formaldehyde as an embalming fluid to preserve the bodies instead of arsenic. So proof of poisoning could not be blamed on the embalming process. What do you think, Henry?
Yeah.
So these cases, I guess, up to then, people were bumping people off, and they would blame it on the embalming thing. And by the way, I have come across other stories where the murderers would make sure that they would give the body of their deceased person, this is of course somebody that had control, to funeral homes that would embalm them with arsenic. In other words, none of this, you're going straight into the ground kind of deal, because they couldn't prove, was that arsenic there to begin with, or was it part of the embalming? So what do you think? Go ahead.
Arsenic. They were still they watered it down like in the 80s back in New York. They were still using it to kill rats.
Right.
But the thing about it is that had like an oil base. You couldn't get that stuff out of your hands, even if you washed it with chlorine. that stuff it's like it would stay greasy and it would just be very annoying. And
Right, yeah, no. That's the thing that that the well, so I think it was powders also because I think that a lot of it there was stuff that would people just put a little bit like in people's whatever beverage or whatever. And yeah, keep going.
yeah,
What were you saying?
and we had a mortuary that every single Cuban in Jersey used. It was called Gorny and Gorny.
Right.
They used embalming fluid.
Or was this in
And
New Jersey?
yeah, in Elizabeth. And let me tell you, if you were walking to the back of that place to for any kind of business, you could actually like literally smell it.
Can you imagine?
And that place was creepy. You could actually like, if you went there at a certain time, even if it was didn't have the air conditioner on, you would feel like cold, and you will see stuff every now and then.
Well, that's absolutely.
Yeah, you would.
Funeral
Yeah,
homes are known for
and
that.
you will. The thing, one time I actually thought I saw my dad, but there was so much like really weird energy there that forget it. My mom was used to do accounting, and she was trying to get their account, and I had to be there with her, and I told her, you really need the money, do it, but I'm not going to be there.
Yeah. Well, you know what? Where there's something there, your imagination takes off, and you always.
And I was a kid, but it's like still,
It
a
happens.
kid sees what he sees.
No, of course, and that's the thing, where does the truth and in the imagination take off? And let's face it, funeral homes are notorious for that. So even if it's not there, all you need to see is hear one little creak, and it's like, that's it. I used to work with a girl many years ago. She was very young, which by the way, one of those things, and she was, for lack of a better word, interning, but they were paying her. She was the one that would put the makeup on the dead people, and you look at her, and she was a real nice girl. Like you would think, nah, to her, she handled it really well. She was young; she was like in her early 20s, and I remember her asking her, "Done?" She goes, "No, they're not suffering. I mean, that kind of deal." But it was like, all right, okay,
No, but in that place, it was floor to ceiling marble, so you shouldn't have been able to hear anything, and you still heard stuff.
okay. The moral of that story is, yeah, okay. Let's. You know what? Sometimes, like I said, and you always hear stuff from different people. Like, hey, you know what? Now, this is next stories. This is just short little snippets. This is what I called Voodoo Crazies. Okay, now we're gonna fast forward. This is February 1920, Kansas City, Missouri. When you see what I mean by crazies, you know why I said that. All right. There's a guy named Tom Bundy. Of all places, Bundy. Not Ted, but Tom Bundy. He's 21 years old. He kills his dad, Joe Bundy, with an axe because what a voodoo doctor told his mother. All right. His mother goes to see this voodoo doctor because she's got some unknown illness going on. Something that's like she's suffering from it, right? So this voodoo doctor turns around and tells her, you need to get rid of your husband because he put a spell on you. All right. And he did this by, he tells her he boiled some herbs and he tricked you into drinking it. And in other words, this is all your husband's fault. And so she comes home later on, by the way. Obviously, Tom says that his mother tells him, I'm telling you, if you love your mother, you will get rid of your father. So she turns around and she's using her own kid as a hitman. But by the way, lest you think that the people believe this to the point that they're willing to kill. This man is telling her your husband did a trick with herbs, got you to drink it, and that's why you're sick. In other words, this is easier for her to believe than to think I might be really sick with some type of illness. So anyway, he hits his dad twice with the axe, takes $70 from him. He gives $30 to his mother who's sick, gives his wife $20, and pays the rent with the rest. And afterwards, he's the one that calls the police and reports his dad's murder. Remember, he's not confessing to it. He comes and tells them, hey, I found my dad axed to death. So eventually he does confess. I'm sure they're... And now, they never say whether the voodoo doctor that told his mom and which basically precipitated everything, they found him. Doesn't say. You never find out what happened to poor Tom Bundy. But guess what? Crazy, crazy, crazy. Crazy wife, crazy kid, and dead husband. What do you think, Henry?
I wouldn't like to be their neighbor.
No kidding. Okay, let's. This is around the same time, 1924. Okay, January 1924. And the reason why I'm saying January, it's important. There's a guy named LZ Sims. All right, and LZ kills his wife Eleanor. Okay. By the way, they're 50. They're not. These are not young people. Because he believes that she cast a voodoo spell over him. And so he hits her over the head with a lead pipe and slashes her throat. And then he turns himself out to the police in Sheridan, Wyoming. By the way, this is where it's taking place, Sheridan, Wyoming. Remember, January. Now, his wife, she's born in France. She had immigrated to Martinique out in the West Indies. Her father was French and her mother's Japanese. And she had met this guy, LZ Sims, in Cuba after the Spanish-American War. And they married there. Apparently he was a soldier. He was out fighting the Spanish-American War. And this is where they meet. They get married. I guess he's originally from Montana. I don't know how they end up in Montana, but here they are. All right. So they bring in two doctors from the United States Veteran Hospital. Remember, he's a veteran at Fort McKenzie. And they diagnose him with suffering from paranoia dementia praecox. All right. And a jury returns a verdict of insane and recommended his commitment to the state institution at Evanston. This is in Wyoming. All right. So, by the way, that paranoia dementia praecox, obviously you're going crazy. But by the way, that was sometimes the diagnosis when people had syphilis, untreated syphilis. But I don't know. We don't know the origin. Anyway, so they're taking him, all right, in a passenger train to the asylum. And he leaps from the window of the car. And that's going at 60 miles an hour. And this is when they're approaching like Fort Steele. I guess they didn't think they had to guard him because they're thinking he's crazy, but not that crazy. So he jumps out at 60 miles an hour off the train. About a few days later, on February 22nd, remember, January, February, this has got to be the coldest months in Wyoming. They find him. He's suffering from severe exposure, and both of his feet were so frozen that they had to amputate them. All right? So, and by the way, and he's also starving. So he tells the police that the spirits had made him jump from the train, and then they told him, you need to give yourself up. Now, what's really funny is this happened in 1924. The 1920 census is 4 years before. He's living with his wife, his stepson, a guy named Clement Davis is living with him. And 10 years later, this guy's life has drastically changed. Now he's at the asylum, all right, and he's engaged. Even though he's missing both feet, they assign what's called ward work. I don't know what that ward work is, but after that, we lose track of him. Chances are he might have died. But yes, that's why I call those voodoo crazies.
Work is like a trustee.
Well, I guess whatever. Maybe they gave him a.
Like they consider him sane enough that he could do some stuff.
Well, yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. He apparently, even though he was very deeply disturbed, and so anyway, yeah, that's my crazies. Now, this is the next story. This is one of those characters, and believe me, this guy's a character. It is April 1925 when this starts out, and this gentleman's name is Dr. Ray. I'm going to say it only once, not the beginning. Raycock, E-H-H Hyghcock. All right. And this opens up in Camden, New Jersey. All right. All of a sudden, it's April 1925, and there's charges of murder pending against Dr. Hyghcock, who calls himself a voodoo doctor. When they say doctor, they don't mean MD. It's voodoo doctor. And his house gets raided after his 7-year-old daughter says to police that her father had killed the woman and buried her body in one of the secret passages under their house. Which, by the way, he rented 2 houses that were right next to each other at 413 and 415 Liberty Street in Camden, for any of you that live in Camden. Anyway, so this happens. They had arrested him originally for practicing medicine without a license. And they're like, oh my God, whatever. What are they going to do with this guy, right? He's a character. And right when they're about to let him go, his daughter says, oh, by the way, my dad killed somebody, a lady, and buried her. They're like, what? So they go out there. The police immediately go out there, and they find that there's all these tunnels and everything running under these 2 houses. Okay? There's a bunch of rooms and compartments under the cellar, and in these chambers, they found bodies of chickens, pieces of dry meat. They found a bunch of really weird dressed dolls, painted dolls. And they also found some bells that were operated by an electrical switch in the kitchen. All right. And so they're like, wow. So again, when his daughter, all of a sudden, he's telling them, no, I don't know anything about that. I hadn't killed. That's my daughter. She's confused. And he's saying, I'm a spiritualist. And by the way, he also operated a taxi cab company and a real estate business. And in the meantime, the daughter, as a matter of fact, goes on to say that when her mom had gone to Washington to see a sister, one of her sisters, that a woman comes knocking at the front door real late, and she hears her father arguing with this lady. Next thing you know, that's my cat. Who was it?
Boo
Boo Boo. Okay. Boo Boo is AKA the black cat.
Crazy cat.
Yeah. So anyway, she tells police, yeah, he shot her, and then he took her away and burned her, and they're like, no, she's confused, this and that. So the police are like, okay, this is murder. So of course, when they're going out there, they're digging everything up because they're thinking there's a body buried under here. So all they're finding is a lot of junk. They did find the bones of 4 infants. Again, they also hold his wife. Now, at that time, he's saying he's 71 years old, and he had come to Camden several years before. He had come over from Norfolk, Virginia. And again, they're trying to hold his wife, but the daughter said, no, my mom wasn't there. It was late at night. They were in this big room in the front of the house, and then her pop got a gun and shot the woman, and he took her out in his automobile, burned her, and she said that he told her to keep quiet and said the woman was sick and died, and he buried her in a cemetery. So they also arrest another guy whose name is Louis Reeves, and he's like the voodoo doctor's chauffeur. And now it turns out that Hyghcock owns several cars, so that's why he had a chauffeur to take him around. So they're questioning him, like, we need to know, you're just not this harmless spiritualist guy. He tells them that he's a bigamist, that he's married to 5 women at once, and that he had already had 37 children. Let me repeat that, 37 children. I'm telling you, he's a character. So while the police are going under all these tunnels and things under both of these houses, they find a bloodstained hatchet buried under a floor, a hidden vault with the entrance freshly cemented, and it was recently wallpapered. They found a well under the sacrificial room, and when they removed the lid, it smelled so bad that all the police had to leave. Like the underground, it smelled so bad, whatever it was that they had thrown in there. They found a bloodstained mattress, a mattress cover hidden in a second-story rear room, and like I said, at least the skeletons of 4 infants were found on the properties. Now, but what they wanted the most to find, they couldn't find, which was a dead lady or a dead adult. How's that? A dead adult. So they also find out, by the way, that he's involved in what we now refer to as human trafficking. All right. He admits to them that he brings girls from different parts in the southern United States, keeps them hidden in the cellars and in the subcellars, because of the way cellar and subcellars, until he can find a job for them somewhere in either Camden, in Philadelphia, or in that vicinity. And he calls this his girl farm. What do you think, Henry? So,
wow.
He even says, my last batch was 8 girls from Florida. Now, and you're thinking, well, why is this guy doing this? Guess what? Once he gets them a spot, like some type of job, they have to come back every week and give him part of their earnings.
That's some gangster shit.
Yeah. So, now, they found what they called murder letters. They were found in his house under a bureau in a room on the 3rd floor. And check out, this is what, when they say murder letters, this is, you're going to see that this is very similar to what that other Dr. Horsey in Philadelphia, the kind of letters that people were sending him. What it read, this, by the way, this was dated November 27th, 1923, and it read, Dear Doc, I have been wondering why you don't answer my letters. I got a letter from your wife saying that you were out of town and that she would let me know when you came back. Doc, he went away and came back and went again and back. Doc, are you working on him? I don't see any change in him. For God's sake, do something with him. Is there any way that you can kill him next month? You know you told me if I did not kill him, he would kill me. Doc, he is no better than he was when I was up to see you. If this powder don't reach him, you'll have to give me something else. I'm still using the powder every other day, and only thing I notice in him when I use the powder, he gets a little excited. Enclosed you will find $5, and that only leaves $15. So imagine she's on a layaway plan. Please answer at once and let me know what you are going to do. Etta M. Harsey, 1520 Arctic Avenue, Atlantic City. It was registered and sent special delivery. There was also another letter from somebody else asking same thing for help in getting rid of a woman. All right. Now, when the police are doing their investigations, they find out that he had already once been arrested in Philadelphia in 1923, and he bought his way out of jail for $100, and that he was arrested in connection with the shooting of a woman. So, and that before he went to Philadelphia, he used to keep a den in Norfolk, and he was driven out of town and he had to leave. I guess people there, I don't know, the police or the people were like, get out of here. So from Norfolk, he went to Philly. From Philly, he went to Camden. So they come, by the way, these houses that he's living at, they're not even his. These houses are rentals. Okay. And the guy, his name is William Miller. He's a druggist. He's the owner of the one house on Liberty Street. By the way, he's the brother of a city council member, and he gives permission for like the police to tear out the underground partitions, like everything, and to dig underground. And the other house is owned by this guy named Nathan Katz, who's a real estate dealer close by. So it makes you wonder, did these people ever care or wonder, or was it okay with them that this guy had?
I guess at that time, they didn't really pay too much attention to stuff.
It was like you rented the house. Oh, you're making all these tunnels underneath the house?
See, at that time, everybody was so poor that you could probably buy the mayor, the governor, the president for like $500.
Oh no, remember this is 1924. This is even prior to the Great Depression.
No, no, but back then the
Yeah,
salaries were so
I know.
low.
It was like, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
They're just renting out the house. So anyway, by the way, when the police are digging all this up, there's thousands of people that are out there watching the police dig up this whole yard and all these tunnels and this debris and all this crap. All right, it's like everybody's there, like, hey. So remember now, in April, they released him on bail, since the only charge against him were practicing medicine without a license, and they had found no human bones of an adult. All they had found, So he obviously has to move. So let's fast forward a few months. This is July, and the neighborhood. This is around where the Liberty Street houses are. All of a sudden, in the middle of the night, they're thrown into what's called a frenzy of terror, where all the neighbors call police and they say, "Hey, we're hearing moans, whimpers, howls. We're hearing it coming from what they call the voodoo den." So police go out there. They've always been around. They find 3 men and a woman dancing and shouting in an upstairs bedroom, which, by the way, by then the house was already considered tainted and haunted. So these dumbasses, they're in there in the third floor. I don't know what they were doing, and all the neighbors are having a meltdown because they're thinking that's it. The voodoo den, is like, it's the spirits. So anyway, fast forward into the next year. It's October 1925. Everybody's forgetting about Dr. Hyghcock, and all of a sudden he makes the newspapers again. When, check this out, there's a bomb that's set off under the Justice of the Peace, a guy named Tony Rocco. All right, and the bomb damages his front porch, breaks a few windows in the district. This was a bomb, by the way. Now you're asking yourself, pray tell, what does a bomb going off? By the way, Tony Rocco is in Camden. What does Tony Rocco having a bomb go off at his house have to do with Dr. Hyghcock? Here we go. So the police, they're investigating why is he getting bombed, and they uncover what they call a strange story of voodooism. And it turns out that one of the ones that's involved is a lady who's considered one of Doc Hyghcock's disciples. And she, because of this, they find what, quote, is exposed an orgy of wide open gambling in the third ward. I'm telling you. Turns out there's a guy, all right, named Anthony Paradise, but he's known as Babe Paradise. He gets arrested on a suspicion that he set off the bomb. Do me a favor.
What?
Did I turn the kitchen off? Yeah, I did. I'm sorry for folks. Anyway, Anthony Babe Paradise, he's arrested on suspicion of having set off the bomb.
Do you want me to go check?
Yeah. Who they also arrest is a lady called Leona Brown. Okay, now Leona Brown is called the mystic of the third ward. Who Rocco, who's a counselor on the assembly, she had charged him $100 for treating his wife, Mrs. Rocco, and who failed to help her. And he produces a receipt for the police signed by Leona Brown for medical services for $82. By the way, again, $82 is a lot of money. Rendered to his wife according to, quote, witchcraft methods. And he tells police, I bawled her out because she didn't help my woman any, and she said she would get me, end quote. Now, the police at this point, they don't believe that she set off this bomb. But they believe that she'd been selling these strange charms and potions to all the sick people in Little Italy. And now they held her for practicing medicine without a license. She, like Hyghcock, when she goes to court, she's telling them, no, all I am is, I'm just a spiritualist. The other guy, Babe Paradise, now, he's a different story altogether. They find out he's operating a big gambling house near the Rocco residence, and he's arrested on charges of forgery and larceny. All right? So, in other words, everybody's forgetting about Hyghcock except one of his disciples inadvertently is part of a bomb going off, and she's treating the city council guy who they also believes in some type of witchcraft. And she's going all over Little Italy selling stuff, by the way, expensively at $82 a pop. All right, and it wasn't working. And of course, here's Babe Paradise running a gambling joint and you name it out of that area. And why he wanted to put a bomb under this guy's house, who knows? But anyway. So fast forward about 3 years. It's 1928. And Hyghcock, he's arrested. I'm telling you, I have to laugh at this because it's funny. He's arrested for having a loaded revolver, and he's driving a motor car without a license. Now, he's driving a boxcar sedan from 1861. I don't know how far back how he got this. This must have been an old car. And he's wearing a high hat and hip boots. And he tells the police he's carrying the weapon for protection. So apparently, this cop pulls him over for driving. He's got no license. He's got a weapon.
It's funny because those cars are like 3-cylinder.
And he's got a high hat and hip boots on.
Those cars are funny. It's like 3-cylinder.
Okay, so anyway. Now, fast forward 3 more years. This is 1931. And he gets arrested after a girl, she goes to the police because he gives her some powders for an illness that he called snakes. What snakes are. Apparently she got mad. Maybe who knows. She went to the police. Now at this point, this is the way they describe him. He's a short, squat man. He weighs about 200 pounds. And at that time, he's saying, I'm 82 years old. And by then, he had fathered 48 children. Again, we don't know how much of this is true. 37, 48, who knows? Now, they do say that he looked younger than that. Because in truth, no one really knew his real age. And by the way, that last name of Hyghcock, that's a made-up name. Nobody knows his real name. Nobody knows his real, true birth name. So anyway, fast forward, it's 1935. This is already 10 years after the Camden, New Jersey thing. And federal agents, now by this time, Prohibition, this is all going on. They come up with 2 25-gallon stills in a labyrinth of tunnels and caves near Malaga that were tied to him. So this guy, if he wasn't directly involved in it, he had his finger. Remember, he used to run taxi cabs and real estate. He had his hand in everything. So even if it was something he wasn't directly doing, he would, in other words, he would somehow or other get money in his pocket because of it. All right. So now this is 1938. And by the way, this is going to explain maybe why also the babies, those infant, he's charged with performing an abortion on a 13-year-old girl. And the girl's stepfather, this guy named Fleming Poindexter, he's also arrested. Why? Because apparently he had fathered the child. So they release him for insufficient evidence, but the stepfather's arraigned. So this might have explained also why they had when they dug up those cellars, why they found the baby's bones. And he dies in May of 1942. So now this is the thing. This is right around we're going to go backtrack a little bit. He dies May of 1940. But 1926, this is like a year after Hyghcock is scandalizing Camden and all that. There's a guy named Sam. He's also in Camden. His name is Sam Fulton. He's 30 years old, but he's from Jamaica, New York. All right? And he's charged with first-degree murder in what was known as the Voodoo Murder. Now, he's accused of killing his common-law wife, Minnie Hall, on Palm Sunday. And he remains next to her bed for 5 weeks. I'm telling you. Praying. Now, he gives himself up because his dead wife appeared to him in a dream and told him to admit to the murder, accept being electrocuted, and join her in heaven. This guy, I don't know. I don't know if they examined him for being crazy or if not. But bottom line, he got sentenced to 20 years at Sing Sing, pled guilty to second-degree murder, claiming now he's changed. It was self-defense after she attacked him with a hatchet. And he escapes a death sentence by admitting by that plea deal, he escapes a death sentence. Now, he shows the county detective who's out there where he's got a scar on his head from where she had gone after him. That the argument had stemmed because he discovered that she was being unfaithful to him. Now, check this out. Minnie Hall, the deceased lady, was said to have been one of several women on the staff of a Jamaica, what they called cellar digger, known as Doctor, who brewed weird concoctions to ensure the drinker against the loss of her husband's love. Now, who she worked for? Was it Doc Hyghcock? Was it another voodoo doctor? Nobody knows. And the reason why I say this is this guy was a character. This Dr. Hyghcock.
Yeah.
He was something else. I'm not telling you he wasn't the greatest guy, because he was into hinky stuff.
Hey, he was creative.
I'm a bigamist. He's just like, I think if you're facing, murder charges, because your 7-year-old daughter tells the cops, yeah, my dad, he had a fight with a lady, shot her and buried her underneath the house. So you're saying that you're a bigamist and you have fathered 37 children? Who cares? But bottom line, and you know what? It's really funny because I'm sure that after getting himself out of these troubles, there was probably people out there who were saying, he's really powerful voodoo doctor. Look, he got away with that. By the way, nobody really knows if he did take that lady out somewhere and buried her. Because that's what one time the kid says, no, he buried her underneath the house. And another time she says, he put her in a vehicle, drives away, and she told him, took her to the cemetery. Again, no body, no victim, no crime. What do you think, Henry?
But again, you got to give the devil his due because he never got caught. Not really.
No, really, no. He died of old age.
That's what I said. You got to give the devil his due.
So I'm sure his reputation, probably they were saying, man, he's the man. Look at that. They dug up his yard. They were ready to, that's it. Nothing came of it. He kept going.
And he died with laughing at him.
Yeah.
That's what I said.
And this guy, he was doing human trafficking. He was bringing in these girls from the southern states, which I have a feeling probably, some of them were probably maybe from poorer families. He would bring them into Camden, Philly, in the vicinity, get them a job. But guess what? They had to come back and give him part of his earnings. So that's why he had a bunch of cars, why he had a chauffeur.
Wait, let me tell you. And him being Haitian, and
I never said he was Haitian.
No, voodoo is Haitian.
No, I know that, but sometimes they would mix that in there. His background was a mystery. The last name of Hyghcock, the way he spelled it.
That's why I say that might not be his name.
No, there wasn't. I looked.
That's a name that he gave himself.
Nobody knows what his real age was.
But his real name is probably French Creole.
Maybe nobody knew his real name. A lot of his family, though, did live in Washington D.C., but nobody knew his real true name. Nobody knew his real age.
He was like the voodoo version of John Gotti, being all over the place, because in New York there was a couple of voodoo families, but they kept so much under the radar. Unless you actually really knew, you wouldn't know.
Well, let me tell you, they were, that guy, he might have gotten, for lack of a better word, he might have gotten away with murder, but you could see he had money coming in from.
He was a hustler.
Oh, for sure, with a capital H. So anyway, I'm telling you, by the time I finished, I was like,
a voodoo grifter.
Dr. Hyghcock. And by the way, he spelled his, and for those of you who aren't watching the video, he would spell his last name Hyghcock. Right? Very unusual spelling. Believe me, I was like so, this guy that I said, I need to find out who
maybe he was illiterate.
I don't think he was. I don't know. He's a real mystery man, but whatever. So anyway, this is a really interesting story, this one. And this involves a man called Carl Merker. Okay, December 1929. This is 2 months after the crash, the market crash. So we're just heading straight into. Now, Carl Merker arrives in Tampa, Florida, and he gets charged of vagrancy and sentenced to 30 days in jail. Which, by the way, police would do that. If they pick somebody up, this is, of course, mostly with men. If you didn't have a job or place to stay, they will put you in jail for vagrancy. So anyway, he spends 30 days in jail. Now, a month later, by the way, at this time, this guy is just 22 years old. He's a young guy. All right. They report that this guy was murdered. Carl Merker has been murdered. And they contact his family's originally from Nebraska. So they contact his dad, Fred Merker, and they tell him, hey, your son has been killed. And he's telling the Tampa police, no, my son, he's been traveling for the past 4 years, and each winter he goes south. And his last visit in Nebraska was a few months before, like in May. And but he left to New York with a stable of show mules, but then followed the horses at racetracks. In other words, this guy always worked with the race horses and stuff. So he would go, I guess, wherever these horse races were being held at. And he had written to them that he was in Georgia 2 months before. So this corpse, all right, is identified by the ward, a county convict ward, and 2 prisoners there in Tampa. These 3 guys say he's Carl Merker, who had just been released from spending 30 days in jail for vagrancy. So they're thinking, okay, these 3 guys spent 30 days with this guy in jail, so they know what they're looking at. So in the newspapers, they're saying, yeah, he survived by his parents, the obituary thing. His brother's 12, and his mother, a daughter 10, whatever, a sister, whatever. Now, what makes it worse is they're telling his dad that he was killed as part of a sacrifice in a voodoo ritual. And so the way that it happened is, there's a guy named Richard Sheard. This is, by the way, is in Tampa. And he admitted to the police that he had smashed Merker's skull with an axe. And what he says is that what he thought was an unknown man had broken into his cabinet, and that he killed him thinking it was an intruder. He's telling police, I was asleep. It's 1 a.m. I wake up because I hear somebody on the back porch, and I look out and I see a man prowling around. So he goes out the front door, gets an axe from a wood pile, comes back, and hits the man on the forehead with the axe, of course, as he's trying to force the rear door. Sheard turns around, calls the police, and this guy Merker dies on the way to the hospital after being struck in the head with an axe. So the voodoo angle comes into this because when the police, they arrive and they start going into this guy's house where he was trying to break into, they find these wax dummies all bandaged up, hanging, by the way, life size, hanging from the ceiling. And all this bunch of weird paraphernalia that they said was reminiscent of voodoo rites. This inside this Sheard's house. He turns around and tells police, look, these dummy, I'm taking some Red Cross lessons in first aid at where I work at. Which kind of sounds suspicious. But anyway. Then he kind of changes the scent and he goes, no, that they're part of his activities because he belongs to the local lodges. Local lodges, I don't know if they mean Freemason lodges, I don't know what. Because apparently there's weird paraphernalia. It's just not life-size dummies hanging from the ceiling. So I guess the cops are thinking, okay, was this guy really breaking in? And did he kill him? Or what was the deal? So the police thinking, okay, he's telling us he had a loaded gun inside the house. Yet he goes to another building outside, gets an axe, and kills the guy instead of shooting him or holding him with a pistol. Now, this dead guy, he has his own set of unusual stuff on him. He's got 22 cheap gold rings, some letters, a razor, a workman's badge issued in Birmingham, Alabama, and about $4 in cash. Okay, to me that sounds like stuff of a thief because 22 cheap gold rings, come on. So,
or a grifter.
Or something, 22 cheap gold rings. So this poor guy Richard Sheard, he's held on first-degree murder charges. Because it turns out that they were saying, hey, this guy Sheard that killed this guy, he happened to just spend 30 days in jail along with the guy that got killed, Merker. And they're thinking, wait a minute, what are the odds that the same guy that you were in jail with for vagrancy, you end up killing him because he's trying to break into your house? So they hold him. So anyway, Fred Merker in Nebraska pays $400 to get this body shipped to him. His son, he's in Omaha. After he pays $400, all of a sudden he gets a telegram, a wire, which is what they call it back then, in Bowling Green, Florida, by Carl Merker, his son. And it reads, do not take that body of that man. I am still alive and doing good. I'm still with KG Barcoop Show. Send a wire at once. And the dad's like, what? Now, it turns out Carl Merker's alive, according to this wire, and he's holding down like $1 a day job with the Barcoop Carnival Company. And his father, I imagine, they're like, remember, now at this point, nobody knows what to believe. So it turns out that this guy Merker, Carl Merker, he left home just after grade school. This guy was a wanderer, and he went traveling with Ringling, Barnum and Bailey, and a bunch of other shows. And in other words, he worked as a circus, what they call a routeabout. And most of the time he was dressed like in old brown coat, corduroy trousers, shoes that basically didn't have any soles left, and an old blue shirt. Now he looked, in other words, like a bum, but his father was a wealthy real estate dealer. His family was well off in Omaha, right? But this guy, he just loved that life. So this body, all right, is already in transit over to Omaha. And while they're waiting, when the body is, the dad's saying, I'm not taking the body. So they hold it at a morgue, because the dad's saying, I'm not taking the body. My son's saying he's alive. Now, by the way, this is not the first time this guy, Carl Merker, has done stuff to throw to what they give his parents what they call a bad turn. Okay, in 1917, when he's 9 years old, he goes missing for 5 days. And he's given up for dead. The parents are thinking somebody took him, he died, he found whatever. And he turns up in Lincoln, Nebraska, in the custody of the chief of police. And he tells the police that he had just gone visiting, quote unquote, visiting. So apparently this guy was, I don't know if he was, from 9 years old, he was just one of these wanderers. Okay, so they have this body. They don't know. They're sending people all over the place trying to find out, is this guy really alive? Who's he dead? Well, if that guy's dead, then who's this guy that got killed? So there's the body, then another person, another guy named M.S. Harrell. He says, look, that guy that got killed, that dead body, is a dockhand by the name of Henry Rhodes. And I've known him for 15 years. And in the middle of this, everybody's, okay, it's Rhodes. In the middle of this, Henry Rhodes' sister arrives at the funeral, at the morgue in Omaha. And she says, that's not my brother. So it's not Henry Rhodes. So then they say, no, that is, the name of that dead guy is Thomas O'Connell. He's a laborer from Tulsa, Oklahoma. And they get this tip from, there's a company, they get a telegraph from a company in Tulsa, a construction company, saying, hey, that guy is so-and-so. At this point, the coroner is saying, I'm not identifying this guy. I don't. In other words, so many people are saying it's him, it's not him, that he's like, nah, I'm not going to identify him. Like, I'm not going to sign a piece of paper and say, this is who it is. So, Tampa's chief of police detectives, this is a guy named Fred Thomas. And he says, look, I'm surprised that they ever said that this guy was Carl Merker to begin with, because Carl Merker is 22 years old, and this guy is at least 40 years old. In other words, you could tell this was not this was an older man, so he's thinking, why did they go with that theory that this is
Oh, what?
Merker? So, and then he says, and his father should have been required to come down here and identify his son, and then just accompany the body back to Omaha. In other words, they're saying if the dad would have come to Tampa, he would have said, no, that's not my son, and that would have been it. All right. So at this point, because right now, Tampa's got what they think is a murder case, but the body's in another state. Now, the only thing that they say is that the description of the guy did match Merker, which was that he had reddish hair, a hooked nose, freckles, and a light complexion. So when you say, does this look? Yes, the only thing is that there was like a 20-year difference between one and the other. So.
But that kind of that's kind of like everybody.
Well, but back then, but if they're saying, hey, it's Merker, remember, 2 convicts, and I think that's Merker, and they go, yeah, Merker had this, and this, light complexion, freckles, whatever, and they're thinking, okay, these people were just in jail with him, and remember, this is another thing, this guy smashed him in the forehead with an axe. Makes you think maybe his face was kind of disfigured to the point that's the only thing I could think of. So anyway. Now, 2 weeks have gone by. Now, the police take a closer look at the workman's badge that they found with him and was stationary. And it indicates that the guy remember, this guy had a bunch of stuff, so they really don't know if this ID, this is the time before picture IDs. If this picture ID was really him, but it says that he worked for the William Brothers Inc. of Tulsa. And that part of his job, if that was really him, was to travel to different states while working for the company. Okay. Now, in comes another guy. His name is George Knapp. He lives in Omaha. He goes to see the body, and the chance that it might be his brother, Jasper Knapp, what they call. His name was Jap. He's 52 years old, so his age is better. Who 3 years before had left with Ringling Brothers Circus and was last known to be out of work and living in Orlando. Like, in other words, these people, they will go traveling. The family would hear on and off from them. Last they knew about him was he was in Orlando. That was it. Turns out that wasn't him. So, bottom line, on January 29th, 1930, this unknown guy is buried in an unmarked grave in the Potter's Field at Forest Lawn Cemetery in Omaha. The guy, Richard Shear, he gets released in June. The charge of manslaughter is dropped. The authorities had no choice but to believe this version of the story of how he killed this unknown man who was trying to break into his house. Now, fast forward, 1959, Carl Merker, he's alive. He makes the papers. He's still working in the racetrack thing, and he's held up by 3 guys. They take his wallet. He was working at the racetrack in Del Mar, California. He was walking his job from the bus stop, and he dies in 1970 at the age of 63. So, what do you think, Henry? It turns out to not, and this, for all, I have a feeling that it was that guy from the Tulsa Construction Company, but bottom line.
See, it's hard to tell because it's like around that time, there were so many red-headed, freckled people that it's like.
You know what? You know what I think is really sad?
Ginger was the thing back then.
Okay, ginger. You know what I think is sad, though? That at least these other men that had gone missing or had dropped from sight, they had people that showed up to see if that was really him. The sister, people would show up. This person, the guy that supposedly was the employee of that construction company, apparently, I guess, he had no family or somebody that the company could even say, hey, we think your brother, father, uncle, cousin, whatever, he's been killed. Do you want to, nobody ever came, and besides the company is what I'm saying. Your employer is the only one who's kind of trying to get you identified.
Back then, they would actually like either pay people with notes, gold or silver. So the only reason that somebody would actually come and really make an effort to do that is because they wanted money.
Well, no. But what I'm saying is that, Henry, that it's sad because you would think that, like I said, it's very sad when the only one. That's my nice little kitty. Oh, nothing like a black cat when you're doing a Halloween show. Hey, Marnie.
She's attacking your TV.
I know. She does this usually around this time.
Okay,
well, don't worry about it.
She told me to put her away.
It's no big deal. Anyway, so you gotta love her though. So anyway, what I'm saying is this guy dies. And by the way, I'm assuming that because they found that badge, because remember, there's no picture ID that this was the guy. He might have stolen it from the original guy. We don't know. This poor man. But let's go on the supposition that that was really him. If it wasn't for his employer, this guy just drifted along, going from job to job, whatever. It looks like he was a petty thief to go with it, but still, nobody cared to find out how. Hey, no, that's pretty sad. That to me, that was like, oh, that's pretty sad. You know what? I think it's time for this. Hold on. Remember, it's Halloween. So anyway, let's keep going. All right, I'm telling you, anything that was weird, anything that had some type of murder, weird, like that guy, like stuff hanging from the ceiling, it ended up being called a voodoo something, whatever. Right? Now this next one, this is out there. This is out there, folks. Okay, out there. So anyway, we're coming back to Philly. All right, Philadelphia, January 1932. And there's a guy, his name is Norman Bechtel. And he's an insurance company employee. And somebody takes him and throws him from an automobile into the lawn of this huge estate in this area called Germantown. He's found alive, but dies 2 hours later in the hospital. This guy is 35 years old, and he's a member of a very well-known Berks County family. In other words, his family is very well known in Berks County. His father, Samuel, was a merchant, and he worked for his uncle, Joseph B. Bechtel. And this family founded a town called Bechtelsville, that was 5 miles from Boyertown, and many relatives lived in the nearby town of Palm, Congo, Bally, Bardo, and Gablesville. Now, this guy, he's found by a police officer behind a big mansion that was called Lone Oak. And this home was owned by Mrs. Stokes. It had stood vacant for about 10 years. She would travel so much. It was like this huge estate. And so, in other words, it makes it sound like whoever threw him out there knew that this place was empty. Now, the officer hears his moaning coming from behind some bushes. He had been in the area because the estate next door belonged to a guy named Judge Harry McDavitt, who was getting bomb threats. So they had posted a cop out there. And when the cop's doing his round, he hears moaning from behind the bushes, finds this guy, and, anyway, he dies. He never gets to talk. So they find out that this guy Bechtel had 8 stab wounds near the heart, 2 in the head, and his skull was fractured. And later on, the cop says, oh, yes, I did notice, I did see an automobile stop near the area where he was found. All right. Now, remember, this is not like your regular, this is not your regular residential neighborhood. These are estates, so the yards are very far apart, that kind of deal. So they're like, oh my God, his face had gotten carved up, stabbed. So this guy was an officer for the Mennonite church. If anybody's not familiar with the Mennonites, sometimes people confuse them with the Amish, that they wear the little bonnet, the women, and the men, they kind of have that the hats like the Amish. They're I don't think they're as restrictive as the Amish, but and so there's a guy. This is right after they discover that he's been found basically on death's door. There's a guy named Robert Ross. He's a Mennonite church officer. He tells the police, look, Bechtel, okay, we all went, him and this other girl named Eleanor Temple, we were all attending this church meeting the night before. He tells us, look, I'm going to drop you off. He drops off first Robert Ross, okay, and then he drops off Eleanor Temple. Now, before they really realize what's going on, they theorize, the police think that he had been stabbed with a stiletto, and that possibly he was trying to defend the girl, and that because they couldn't find her right away. It turns out this was not the case. It was very different. Next day, by the way, they can't find his car. Next day, they find his car about 5 miles away, and it's full of blood. They finally end up talking to the girl, and she says, oh no, after he dropped off Robert, he dropped me off. No, like in other words, it wasn't because over me. But this goes in a different direction from what the police expect. So when they're looking at his, all his wounds, they're saying that all his wounds are connected to what they call the Pennsylvania hex doctors. These weird symbols that were found on his forehead, and they said that he had small crescents have been cut on each side of his forehead, and a horizontal line cut about 1 inch under each crescent, okay? And that there was another cut just starting below the hairline that ran straight down to the bridge of his nose. And then 2 others diagonally upward from each eyebrow. Now, the police are thinking with good reason that whoever did this deliberately. That they marked him with either a razor blade or a scalpel. And that there was also a circle formed around it. In other words, they stabbed him they stabbed him once in the heart, and then they stabbed him 7 times right around the heart. That there was the puncture things, right? So they're thinking, because by the way, there's a what they call hex-ray or powwowers, that in some cases, some people think normally, if you read up on that, they're mostly like folk or ritual magic, but some people say that it gets darker. And back in 1928, there was another murder tied into that. But anyway, this is why the police are going in that direction as to why this guy was killed, and they can't figure it out because of these markings on his face and the way he was killed. So they find his diary. This guy, Bechtel, that gets killed, he's got a diary that goes back 9 years. But no answers to say, hey, this is the person, he wrote in his diary, so-and-so has it out for me. It only contains the name of men and women he worked with at the church and the Boy Scouts. Apparently he was involved with the Boy Scouts, right? So now the police are also weirded out because they can find no fingerprints on his car. None. It's got blood. Apparently this was where he was killed or something happened, but they can't find any fingerprints, right? Now, within a few days of the crime, they've got 3 theories. 1, that it was robbery. 2, that he's attacked by a maniac. And 3rd, that he's what they call a victim, a so-called hex or witch victim. In other words, that it wasn't, we're not trying to steal from you. It was not a maniac. It was that there was some type of weird religious occult angle to it. Now, this guy, he carried life insurance for remember, he worked for an insurance company. He carries life insurance for $60,000. And the police thought, well, that's unusual. This guy's only 31 years old, and he's a bachelor. He doesn't have a family. But, okay. Now, when he dies, the bulk of his estate goes to a brother and a half-sister. Gives some money to the church, and he gives another part of the money to the family cemetery, because this family is so influential that they have their own cemetery. And but what the police find out is that, yeah, he had this money that came in after his death, but that he was virtually penniless. That he had speculated in what they call fly-by-night stocks, but that this guy didn't have money. And nobody can figure out, remember, no fingerprints, nothing. Plus, remember, this is a very respected guy. His family's very respectable. He's an insurance, his father, everything. And they're why, who would want to do this? This is not some guy that's like a criminal, you think, oh yeah, there's a million people who want to kill this guy. But how does that go, Henry? That sometimes looks can be misleading.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think?
Yeah. It's like sometimes the least person that you think. Sometimes they say that the most gentle, quiet person is the one you gotta worry about.
Well, or that their lifestyle has that you think, okay, who would want to
The
kill?
least person that you think will never do it is the one who most likely.
Remember, this guy is a Mennonite. He's not just a Mennonite. He's active in his church. He's like not an elder, but he's in the committees. He does all these organizations for everything.
They have proven a lot of that to be true. That if you really look at it, it's like a lot of times, 85% of the time, it's the person the least person you think will never do it is most likely the one that did it.
Wow. Well, this is the thing. The problem is that they're having is how can you find out who it is when you don't have a motive? When you look at the person's friends, family, the circumstances of his life, like, okay, what was this guy doing, or what was he involved with, or who that would be the one to kill him? It was nothing. So a few weeks after the murder, there's a guy named Ellis H. Park, and he's considered like the outstanding manhunter in the United States at that time, the equivalent of what they call FBI profilers back then. He was like, and he says, quote, "The person who killed Norman R. Bechtel probably never saw him before. I would say the murder looks like the work of a person mentally deficient. That makes it an exceedingly difficult task. I would say there's little chance to solve the case except through accident or a lucky chance. The illogical furiosity with which Bechtel was stabbed and slashed seems to confirm this." So this guy, Parky's basically saying this guy was like a stranger on stranger crime. Like if you're looking for a motive, you're not going to find any. What, it was his bad luck? Well, let's see. Now this guy Parker had become famous for solving many murders, including the killing of John Brunin 10 years before. He eventually also he became involved in the Lindbergh kidnapping of the baby. But anyway, now the police are like they're digging. They're like, okay, this poor guy, he gets dumped out here. And I think what they found perplexing was that they couldn't find fingerprints. Like, how can there not be any fingerprints on a car full of blood? Of nothing, right? So there's a detective called Paul Kleinspan. Okay, so he starts investigating and he finds out that there were 2 unsolved murders in the Bechtel family during the last 30 years. 2 other family members have been killed, never solved. So one was a guy named Harry Bechtel. His body's found out in Haddonfield, New Jersey. This is in 1905. Like I said, this was a while back. This guy's an accomplished musician, and he had just moved to Philadelphia. They found him. He's got cuts and lacerations on his face, but no other injuries. And the coroner, he says, look, the cause of death is exposure. Even though he had a bunch of money on him, and he always kept his money inside a vest pocket, they did find the pocketbook some distance away from the body. And his watch, his overcoat, and his hat were missing. But this coroner is saying it wasn't robbery. He's just saying, oh, check this out. He's saying Professor Bechtel was known to be a drinking man. He had been admitted to a Kelly Cures Institution, another name for a sanatorium, at least 3 times, and had been discharged as incurable. Remember, back then, that's how sometimes they would drink. If you had enough money, like alcoholism, you were admitted to a sanitarium. But the county physician, he's saying that this guy, Harry Bechtel, had a light hemorrhage of the brain. He wanders out along this lonely road, and while there, the hemorrhage becomes more profuse. He falls over, and he just dies where he's found. But they never account, like, okay, so who took all this money off of him? So basically, his murder was never solved, and the family always considered it a murder. Even though it was investigated as a crime, they never bought into this idea that the guy had like a hemorrhage and then he walked around, fell over, and died of exposure. Okay, the next family member in the Bechtel family who dies is 1903, October 26th, and her name is Hannah Mabel Bechtel. better known as Mabel. She's 21 years old, and her mother finds her body in the cellar of their home at 627 Cedar Street in Allentown, in case you live there. And her skull's been crushed, but there's no other marks of violence on her body. She's last seen alive driving with a guy named David Weisenberg the day before she gets found by her mom. Okay? Now, her mom tells the police, oh, around 1 a.m., I hear the dogs barking. I look out the bedroom window, and I see two men carrying an object from a carriage and place it in the underground alley near the house. Later that morning, the mother gets up. She finds the daughter's coat and scarf inside the house. This doesn't seem strange. Not until later she goes outside, she finds the daughter's body in that alleyway. Now, she lived at the house with her mom who's a widow, a sister, and several brothers. And she worked at a place called the Palace Silk Mill. She had two admirers. One was a guy named Alfred Eckstein, which his family liked him. And another one was that David Weisenberg, the one that she was seen the last time alive with. But her family didn't like him because he was Jewish. Both of these guys end up getting arrested, and they posted bail immediately because they're under suspicion. These are both her admirers. Now, when the police go there, even though they find her body in the alleyway, they find in her bedroom a stained and broken hatchet, and they also find that her outer clothing had little blood, but her undergarments were saturated, which, according to police, proved that she was undressed when killed. Right? Now, besides those two guys, all her brothers are brought in by the authorities after the body's found. Now, one of them, his name is Thomas Bechtel. He had stains on his clothes, but he tells police, no, man, these are tobacco stains. But the police don't believe him. Like, in other words, they tested it. But guess what? Thomas commits suicide while he's in jail. He cuts his throat with a pocket knife.
With a little help from his friends.
No. Not a little. No, not a little help from his friends. In other words, he's being held in jail, like with all the brothers, everybody. And he cuts his throat with a pocket knife, but he left no note admitting that he killed his sister.
That was a nice inspiration song.
So the police, they say, hey, he committed suicide. He's the one that killed her. But in the meantime, they receive an unsigned typewritten letter from Philadelphia that says, quote, she was killed by her brother. The body was taken downstairs and laid in the passageway. The story was then made up between them about the carriage. The struggle with the girl to get her to release herself from the Jew Weisenberger, who was dragging her down to infamy, occurred that night in a terrible scene when the brother, wrought up to madness, killed her. So basically, it sounds like her brothers had such a meltdown, and Thomas, I guess, killed her. And then the mother got in on it by saying that there was that she had the carriage. I don't know. Maybe her mom was in a tough spot, thinking, "I'm gonna lose my kids." But anyway. Now, whether her brother was the one who killed her, the case was unofficially unsolved, like the other one. They want to give these reasons, but as far as the investigators who fast forward now to Norman, they're saying, hey, this family has got two very weird unsolved murders in their families. Okay. Now, what happens is, like many murder investigations, when they start investigating, guess what? They come up with, they air out the dirty laundry for the family. So, right? So, now if it turns out that good old Norman, the Mennonite, despite his religious activities, he would like to sit in on large stake poker games. Now, a newspaper makes a comparison to the assassination of Arnold Rothstein in 1928, who'd gotten killed a short time after he sat down at a high stakes card game. And supposedly, they say they guessed that the motive when Rothstein got killed was that due to the gaming table, but nobody was ever prosecuted, even though he was a mobster. Now, the inference, it's obvious what they're saying. Hey, Norman Bechtel's murder is involved because he was into gambling. All right. Now, as they dig up more, they find out that he liked to entertain a group of men in his bachelor apartment to play poker, which he called a great American game, but the stakes were not so moderate. In other words, this guy would have a bunch of guys over for a poker game, but they weren't paying like, hey, a couple of bucks here, a couple of bucks there. Apparently, they were high stakes game. So, and they said that even though they're finding out, oh, this guy didn't have money, he was prone to display a thick roll of bills. And some people even thought, oh, this is stuff that he wins at the card table. And his uncle, who's his employer, tells police he often carried several $100s on his person, but he thought that it was money he had collected as a treasurer of the church organizations. Have you noticed how everybody's like pointing in the other direction? Like, I don't know. The card game? The church? I don't know. He's just always running around with a bunch of money. Later on, the family's like, oh, shut up. And they're saying, no, that's not true. His acquaintances, he only would carry $10 or $15. They were saying that thing about him being robbed for murder for robbery, that's not true. In other words, because the police are thinking, okay, if this guy is walking around with rolls of money, maybe he got killed for robbery. And the family, the acquaintances say, no, that's not true. So, at this point, the only clue that the cops have is a chauffeur's cap that's stained with spots, which may have been blood, but this is found near Bechtel's body. Again, they're assuming that it's connected to him, but they're not sure. So, by now, the police, they got rid of that motive of the being tied to the Hexerite curse, even though the newspapers were calling it the I. Mark murder mystery. That's what they dubbed it. They would call murders different things.
But I am.
Now, this thing, Hexray, is a practice of witchcraft among the Pennsylvania Dutch. There are basically three types of magic practitioners. Powwowers, which is white magic, generally for healing and hex breaking. Hexerai, black magic, generally for hex casting. And hex doctors, which is a sort of a gray area of magic, including people who practice white and black magic. So, but anyway, by then they're saying, so there's the captain of the homicide detectives. His name is Captain Harry Heenley. He's in charge of the homicide. Now, he tells the newspapers, hey, this guy, besides being stabbed, they forced his right eye out of its socket. So, in other words, there was some type of even torture involved in it. So there, everybody's trying to think, okay, this guy was held up. Why would you, besides all this markings and stabbing in the heart, and then you're forcing his eye out of his socket just to rob him?
That's gross.
Okay, so now, the more that the police are digging into his life, the police realize, man, this guy took a lot of pains to keep his life mysterious. He kept his own confidence. This is, quote, what they wrote. He kept his own confidence and virtually never talked, even to those who were associated with him in business and those who presumably were his friends, of his personal affairs or his personal life. He was known as being friendly with the neighbors in the apartment where he had lived for 2 years, but made no effort to become closely acquainted. In other words, even friends, acquaintances, people he worked with, people only knew so much about him, and he never discussed with anybody anything. He didn't have what they would say, hey, your best buddy, your best bud. No. Best friend? Nope. So he had few of any girlfriends, and he was known to dress immaculately and had meticulous habits, even a little fussy. Now, he had an aversion for even the slightest dust or the slightest disarrangement of furniture in his apartment. If a chambermaid did not perform her job correctly, he would insist that she be called immediately to rectify her error, regardless of the time of day it was. So if he got home at 6 or 7 and she had moved the furniture,
that's my kind of man.
He would be calling up the apartment manager going, she needs to come over here and fix this or sweep this or whatever.
That's my kind of man.
Well, okay, so when he gets buried, 3,000 people attend. They go out there, they brave the cold weather. And about 3,000 people attend his funeral because everybody, of course,
he was their hero.
No, well, Now, then the next theory is they attribute it to the work of what they call the mysterious 3X maniac. This is a maniac who terrorized Long Island in the summer of 1930. Right? He had already killed like 3 men, and he would send letters to the newspapers. Now, the reason why they think that it's the 3X maniac is that they find a bloodstained rag used by the killer to wipe his hands. And it was wrapped in a newspaper containing a copy of a letter sent by X, the maniac, to Captain William Houghton of the local Secret Service, in which he, I had to laugh at this part, in which he promised to reveal information about the recent communist bombing. Okay, so in other words, they're going in that direction just based on a piece of old newspaper. Now, they also said that the location where he was murdered was similar to that of where the crime was perpetrated on Long Island. And in June 1930, the body of Joseph Mozinski, he was a Long Island grocer, was found shot through the head in a lonely spot in Queens. The killer wrote to a New York newspaper boasting of his murder and telling where the bodies could be found. A large reward was offered, but the killer was not apprehended. By the way, he's never been apprehended. I never had heard of this. Have you ever heard of this, Henry? The 3X maniac from Long Island? I'd never heard of this guy. So anyway.
Long Island is like, you gotta like really want to go there, but Long Island is like not that close.
Okay, well, I never knew. Apparently, but they in other words, they were running out of reasons why this guy had been killed.
There was a reason why they call it Jamaica Queens.
Okay. Okay. So anyway, months pass, and of course, this is making them all look really bad. So, his murderers remains at large, and as a matter of fact, if they would have proven that it was a robbery murder, it's still. So, it's December of 1932, and there's a detective called Michael Korsky, and he had been assigned to this case right from the beginning. They tell him, hey, you need to find out what's going on with this guy, find out an angle as to why he got killed. All of a sudden, he gets stabbed to death in a struggle with a man with an ice pick near 39th Street and Pelton Avenue. Now, there's a big citywide manhunt, and the killer's found. It's a guy named George Sugarfoot Green. He gets captured, tried, sentenced for 6 to 12 years. Now, people are saying, man, that's so weird how his death is very similar to Bechtel's. And they're even saying, was this guy coming too close to learning the identity of the murderer and they killed him somehow? This detective, like, everybody's like, okay, talk about weird motives. So we're going now, 5 years have passed. April 1937. It's 5 years after the crime. And all of a sudden, out of the blue, the police say, hey, we solved the crime. And they're saying there's a guy named William Jordan. He's 36 years old. He's a chauffeur, and he had confessed to the crime. And he says, look, there's 3 others implicated in this. One of them is a woman. There was a 5th person in the gang, but this guy died. Between the murder and now, he died. Now, this guy Jordan, he tells police, look, I didn't kill him. I just saw what happened. I just saw the attack. And he tells the police at the beginning, remember, these stories change, that the reason for the crime was that this guy Norman Bechtel was being blackmailed by this gang. And their names were John Coles, 41, Fletcher Williams, 30, Lucille Young, 29, and Oliver Armstrong was the dead guy. He died. He was the one, supposedly, that killed him. All right? Now, they're saying first that, this gets straightened out. First, they're saying Oliver Armstrong, the guy that was dead, had an engagement to meet Bechtel. And that instead of Armstrong going by himself to meet this guy, all 5 of them go with Armstrong. And when he gets there to this assignation, they got into an argument. And then all of a sudden, this guy Jordan says, man, all of a sudden Armstrong goes crazy and starts stabbing him, right? With what he's called a long-bladed penknife. Armstrong then takes the guy's car to the estate, and they throw the body And then what happens is, in the intervening 5 years, Armstrong dies from natural causes. Now, while Jordan is giving this story to the police, the other three guys are going, that's a lie, that's a lie. They're interrupting him, saying, hey, what he's talking about, we were never there. We're not part of this. You know, during the murder scene, we're like, we don't know anything about this. Now, in the middle of this, we're getting to the crux of the matter. The police become like really cryptic. And they say that the crime was, quote, very complicated. And the mayor, remembered, by now the mayor's involved in this case. He infers that it was motivated by both robbery and a sex angle. What do you think, Henry? A sex angle?
It always is.
A sex angle.
Okay. So was this.
You think? Okay. So, guess what? A mayor, this new mayor, he takes two of the detectives who were originally on the case 5 years before. He penalizes them. Even the captain, he makes them like patrol people. Because he says that they took graft. They took money from the guy's family. One of them took $2,800 from the guy's brother, Wilbur. And the other, who was the homicide squad captain, bought the murder automobile, which was new for only $250. So the mayor's saying, why would you do that? So this convinced the mayor that something is being hidden about the crime by the family, by the Bechtel family. And that diary that they have found, his diary that they have found at the beginning, and a bunch of other papers, all of a sudden they went missing. Oh.
Of course they did.
They went missing. So when they bring in the brother, Wilbur Bechtel, believe me, remember, he's one of, him and his half-sister are the ones that get part of the payoff from the life insurance. They ask him, hey, why he's made this loan to the homicide squad detective, this guy named Frank Chaplinsky. Once he gave him $2,000 and then he gives him $800. And he says, no, Chaplinsky said that he needed the money to settle a debt. And then they ask him, have you ever lent money to a stranger before? And he said, no. Okay. And then it turns out that in reality, the one that he had, that Bechtel had the meeting with, was not the guy Jordan. It was a guy named John Coles, one of the group. He's 41, and he's what they call a pudgy man. He lures Bechtel to this rendezvous. And that William Armstrong did the killing. They're always pointing at the dead guy. All right? And then they start saying that no, that the Armstrong, he blamed Bechtel because he lost his job at the apartments where he was a janitor. And in other words, that was a reason for the argument, which really doesn't. So this is what Jordan is telling the police. Remember, he's the first one that is talking. He says, look, him and this guy Coles, Williams and Armstrong went to a speakeasy by the woman that was in the group. Her name was Lucille Young. This is on January 19th. They sit there all day drinking White Mule all afternoon. They start running out of money. So this guy Coles, he goes to a nearby garage because he was a garage attendant where he worked at, and he's trying to borrow money from somebody so he can keep drinking. He doesn't get any money. Then he remembers, hey, I have a meeting with this guy, Norman Bechtel, this Mennonite guy. Why don't you all come with me? I don't know if he told them to come with him or they invited themselves. So when he goes out to meet Bechtel, they all come, but Armstrong especially comes to him with the automobile. This is when the argument breaks out, and Armstrong starts hitting this guy, Norman Bechtel, in the head. Now, all of a sudden, the mayor turns to Cole, the pudgy guy, and says, do you love silk underwear? His answer was, no, sir. Bechtel never bought me any silk underwear. I had no date with Bechtel that night. Okay, so first of all, that's a weird question. And his answer is even weirder. So you know where we're going with this, right? It was a strange but telling question. Okay, so a few days after his confession, this guy, William Jordan, slashes his throat and legs inside his jail cell. But regardless, they all go. In May of 1937, he goes to trial. They set the other ones free because there's not enough evidence to prosecute them, right? And remember, the actual murderer, according to him, is the dead guy, Armstrong. So when this trial is going on for these people that are accused, they have this lady, Helen Temple, the one that he supposedly dropped off. They tell her, hey, tell us what happened that night. Now that we need to coordinate with what this guy's saying. And she says, look, she goes, after he dropped me off, it looked like he was planning on meeting with somebody. And that in other words, they had never been involved. He was not like a suit or anything. And that she had hardly even knew him. That she wasn't even his friend. And that was that night, she hadn't seen him for months. And they're saying, okay, there's something that he was there because that neighborhood where he was driving around at, where he was killed, of the Stokes estate, was far from his apartment. In other words, this didn't happen like, oh, I'm driving on my way home. This was like on the other side of town from where he lived at. Now, what happened was this guy, Coles, he's identified as an employee of a garage where Bechtel keeps his automobile on South Melville Street. And he was formerly the manager of the apartment house where Bechtel lived. So we're thinking this is where these two met. All right. Now, the coroner, which is a guy named William Wadsworth, he describes that Bechtel had been stabbed 8 times in the heart, once in the hip, and 11 on the head. Now, this guy, William Jordan, he's found guilty of voluntary manslaughter, and he's sentenced to 5 to 10 years in Eastern State Penitentiary. And the DA says, look, I didn't pursue a charge of murder because he believes that Jordan was not the actual killer. In other words, he believes him that the other guy was. He goes, and the place where Bechtel was found was so far from the route he would have taken to his home that police were convinced he went there to keep an appointment. So 3 years later, this guy gets acquitted after being granted a new trial by the state Supreme Court. And lucky for him, there's a dead guy to blame the murder on. Now, this is the thing. There's no fingerprints found in the dead man's car, indicating whoever had been inside it had worn gloves. This did not point to an unplanned encounter. There was also the peculiar way Bechtel was stabbed. William Condon, superintendent for the Philadelphia morgue, said at the time, quote, the deliberate designs of which the wounds were cast resemble a sculptured, carved piece of work. I would certainly like to know the explanation. In other words, this guy didn't just get stabbed in the face. Oh, boo, here. He got stabbed. They made a design.
It's like a ritual killing.
Like a ritual killing, but supposedly it's like... So, why would a murder that escalated from an argument end up with the victim getting wounds on each temple, beginning at the top of the ear and pointing towards the nostril? A crescent-shaped wound carved as if on wood. Deliberate, careful, exact. On each cheekbone was a somewhat similar slash, about 2 inches long. The peculiar knife carvings on each side of the victim's head formed roughly an eye. They had made like a design on his face of an eye. Could this design and the fact that one of his eyes had been removed was done by someone who believed in the evil eye? The knife thrust that killed Norman Bechtel penetrated through his overcoat, his coat, his steel spectacle case, his shirt, and his underwear. Do you know how hard you have to stab somebody?
No.
He then received 7 stab wounds and a circle around his heart. So what do you think, Henry? I'm going to send them off in just a minute, folks, to go take care of the animals over there. What do you think? Do you think that it was that he had a homosexual encounter?
Yeah.
And that it went south because they tried to blackmail him?
Let me tell you, one of those songs looks like it was inspired for a Beatles song.
And because this is what I think. All right. Oh, by the way, the what it looks like to me, and I don't know, but even though you use one explanation, but okay, it looks like this guy was leading like a double life. You know, like Superman by day is one thing, by night another. You look at him, he's an upstanding Mennonite church member, belongs to an old influential family, but It seems like he went out to meet this guy John Coles for his homosexual assignation.
I don't know. A lot of those people, those Mennonite people, look creepy as hell.
No, they're not. But no, Henry, no. What I'm saying is that remember that now I think he goes out there. He's gone out there to meet John Coles. In other words, John Coles already knew to meet with him, and they could have made the appointment because John Coles worked at the garage or at the apartment building where he worked at. So they already knew we're going to meet at this time at this place, right? And now what happens is Coles, before he goes out there, has been drinking with a bunch of his friends, and they've run out of money. And maybe he says, "Oh, I gotta leave. I'm gonna go meet this whatever." And they're thinking, "Man, this is some guy who's a Mennonite. This guy should be easy to blackmail. Like, make him give us some money." And maybe he refused, and that's when Armstrong, like, remember, these guys spend all money all afternoon drinking. What is it, White Mule?
Yes.
Now this is the thing.
That's nasty.
I don't know. Never. The Mennonite church, especially in the 1930s, saw homosexual activity as a sin. And they defined marriage as a covenant between one man and one woman. This was based on their interpretation that the Bible teaches genital intercourse is reserved for heterosexual marriage, and that any violation of this covenant, including homosexual activity, constitutes sin. In other words, I believe this is still their belief. But back then in the 1930s, it was like there was no
middle ground.
No. In other words, so could the nature of his death been the reason why his family paid off the detectives?
Because to avoid embarrassment.
The homicide squad were in charge of the investigation, probably. Let's face it, the scandal would have reflected on the family, the church, and he was still going to be just as dead. So maybe they thought, and this is the thing, did they know? Had they suspected he had a secret life?
Well,
or were they just as stunned as the police?
The easiest thing is kill him off and hide the rest.
Okay, no, they didn't kill him off, but what I'm saying is maybe they were I don't know, did they know, or they were like surprised, or maybe they thought he's dead. Oh my God, he brought it himself. Now,
you know that old saying, "Loose suck a duck, quack suck a duck."
Okay.
It's a duck.
All right. So anyway, I'm sure that his sibling, his brother and his sister, they went to the mayor, I think, who understood really what had gone on with that crime, and asked to suppress an ugly truth about their family member, even at the cost of punishing the killer. In other words, they're saying, look, we don't care if you never cast who the killer is. We just don't want you to put out what really was going on with this crime.
Bury it.
Oh, now, this leaves a question as to why was he tortured, stabbed, and carved with occult symbolism.
Because
This appeared to be a methodical and deliberate act.
they were angry, betrayed.
But why?
betrayed. Well, his wife probably had him do it.
What wife? He has no wife. He's a single guy.
Okay, well then the church had him do it.
No, well, now, this is the question.
Because they felt betrayed because he's supposed to be loyal to them, not be a nasty creep.
Well,
So?
okay, now who kills Bechtel? A sadistic robber, a religious fanatic, or an outraged lover? Now, you ask yourself, where does one end and the other one start? So, do me a favor. Hold on, I'm going to send him off on an errand. Go over there, and I'm almost done. So,
What?
if you want to check on what the dogs are doing.
Okay.
All right, I'm gonna finish this off. Okay, and this is
the chair back.
okay. So, just this is by the way, this happened like right at the same time that this thing happened with Bechtel. Okay, this and by the way, the reason why I bring this up is why you would think, well, why are these people so quick to pin this like as an occult? I mean, besides the fact of the weird way that he got stabbed and all that thing, right around the time that he gets killed, there's a guy named Samuel Ford. This is 3 weeks after Bechtel gets killed. Okay, 3 weeks. after Bechtel gets killed, this guy named Samuel Forte, Forte, he's a night watchman in a place called the Lansdale Foundry. He's 45 years old, father of 10 kids. Now, check this out. Turns out he's a member of a secret cult whose leader, and this is according to Forte's wife, had completely bewitched him. When they found him, he had a window cord that had been fastened around his neck, and the other end was tied to a beam, which was laid over the top of 2 lockers. Now, his hands were tied behind the body with rags, and the feet were held together by a belt. And the body was found like in a kneeling position with the knees barely clear of the floor. The body was found inside the foundry company where he worked at. Now, at the beginning, they're looking at it as was this a suicide? But then later on, they're saying that the way that in other words, that the way his hands were tied, so the knot was that. In other words, he could not have tied his own hands that hard, or that the knot by himself. All right, there's no way. I mean, you could tie maybe your ankles, but you can't tie your hands that way. Now, his mouth was cut, and his left eye was badly bruised, and his lunch was like on a nearby, like he had been eating, and it was like on a nearby bench. Now, this locker room where he worked from, it was like some distance from the factory, and there was nothing of value. And in other words, that for somebody to break in, oh, we're going to take this. He's a night watchman, and the few things he had, they were untouched. So there's one of the detectives, he says, look, all the windows of the foundry were unlocked, and anyone could have come in there. Now, on 3 occasions during the past week, somebody had tried to break into the foundry. And they're saying, but we don't think it was for robbery. And each time Fort, the dead guy, he blocked him. He wouldn't let him in. Now, I don't know, did he hear a noise or whatever? So anyway, the day after this guy dies, Fort dies, this thing about a mysterious Italian religious cult gets into the investigation, and his wife and I guess people around him saying, look, he belonged to this cult. And he had a Bible that was written all in Italian, and he would carry this Bible around with him. He was continuously reading from it, but after they discovered his body, it's gone. It's disappeared. And they questioned 2 of his older sons. One was 21, the other one's 18. They themselves say, look, our dad joined this organization about 7 years ago, but he would refuse to tell any of us, his wife, any of us, his children, any of their secret rites to anybody. And they kept telling him, hey, we want you to get out of that. They were Catholic. And eventually the authorities find out that there's like 5 other members of the cult that lived in Lansdale. This is where this happened. And that they were very, very ultra secretive, but that they believed in faith healing as one of their principles. And that one of their beliefs was that you couldn't take medicine of any type, no matter how ill you were. The police also find out, there was another one, that there was a man that tried to come in to the plant trying to tell them, hey, I need to use the phone. So why they wanted to go in there, was it to get him? What was the reason? And of course the coroner says, he died from strangulation. And the police arrived at the conclusion that this guy wanted to leave the cult. And, they didn't want him to leave. And that maybe the secrets of the cult were in that Bible. And what happened was, by the way, they didn't have a church. What they would meet is that they would rotate the meeting place to the homes of each of the members. In other words, this week or next week or whatever, it's your so-and-so's house. So they would rotate. They didn't have like a church or a certain location. They would just rotate. Now, finally they start suspecting this one guy because of the peculiar knots that they had done for when they tied him up. And at that point, believe it or not, remember, this took place like 3 weeks after Norman Bechtel has been killed. And remember, at Norman Bechtel, they're thinking, oh, there's this occult angle to it, something. So they're saying, oh, this guy belongs to a strange cult. And Norman Bechtel's, so they're thinking, man, is there some cult or occult activity? What's going on? Now, all of a sudden, this guy, Samuel Fort, the investigation takes a turn because the police say, look, you know who murdered him? It was the husband and the son of a woman who were all members of the religious cult that Fort was having a love affair with, right? Because they said that the belt that was used to tie Fort's hands were traced to the woman's husband, and the strips that bound his feet to the tailoring shop where the son worked. Now this lead, check this out. It comes from Mrs. Fort, who tells police, look, I suspected of my husband being unfaithful to me for the past 6 months. She tells him, quote, he was always going to the home of another member of the cult. Many times his friend was not at home and his wife was there alone. He always told me he was going there to pray, but that was not the only reason. End quote. She also said that her husband had been threatened because he wanted to abandon the cult and return to the Catholic Church. And as a matter of fact, she had to give her statement in Italian, and her son was the one that interpreted. Now, at the end, ultimately, even though they had all these clues or motives, I guess, the coroner determines that, hey, he died as a result. In other words, they look at it as a result of a murder or a suicide, even though it was found that his hands were bound so tightly it couldn't have been impossible for him to have done it by himself. In other words, there was a bunch of surrounding things that pointed to this man was killed, but they ruled it like as a suicide somehow. 4 months after, his wife submits a claim for compensation to the foundry company where he works for. And a couple of years later, they're having a hearing regarding this compensation. She says, look, you guys owe my family because my husband died. He's working, and the company's saying, no, he died by suicide, and we're not responsible for that. It fades from the story, which leads me to believe that probably they paid her off, and they just said, okay, like even now, like when they have a gag order, like we're gonna give you money, but shut up, you can't say anything, because it just fades. But my point being that around this time, there was a lot of weird occult / religious beliefs going on. Way outside the whatever people's what was going on in their life, because even now they say, like years after the murder, if you look back at this this thing with Norman Bechtel, the coroner's actions were very suspect. He was really brief, and when they had the coroner's inquest, he had police on guard. He didn't allow the public in. He only had 6 witnesses, and he says, quote, there's no use wasting time over this. We're not going to spend hours when there is not any testimony that means anything, and we're not going to put on a circus for the benefit of morbid, curious people, end quote. The inquest lasts only 20 minutes. They didn't disclose any clues, and the verdict given was that Bechtel died of stab wounds at the hands of a person or persons unknown. All right. Months, like 3 or 4 months after this murder, the Stokes mansion, the estate where he was found dead on the grounds, which was known as Lone Oak, they demolished it. Even though it had stood unoccupied for years, since the owner was usually traveling abroad. So in other words, this old house that was usually empty because the owners, they all had money, they were always traveling, was empty. All of a sudden, after years and years that had been standing there, mostly vacant, oh, we got to demolish it. Now, was it coincidental that Bechtel had grown up on a farm near Boyertown, where powwow was common? The Mennonite deny any belief in powwow magic, by the way. but that doesn't mean anything. Now, what was not released to the public, even during the 1937 arrest of the attackers when they were, trying Jordan, was that Betchel was involved in several love affairs. And they were attempting to blackmail as well as rob him, since he was known to carry money with him at all times. Which goes back, and remember, when they say love affairs, they just didn't specify who he was having the affairs with. Apparently, like I said, because of what he was meeting this guy Coles for over there, and they've been drinking, they needed money, and they thought, oh, we'll tell him, hey, you either give us money or we're going to say who you were out here to meet. And maybe he said, no, I'm not going to give you any money, and it went downhill from there. Again, that his family might have said, look, don't let any of this come out. This is horrible for the rest of our family. And he's dead. And they paid off who they had to. But again, we come right back to what is always, if you're going to set somebody up with the hopes of blackmailing him to get some quick money from him, because you want to keep on drinking or whatever. Remember, this guy, again, I don't care what the family said, I do believe this thing that he did carry money around with him. All right. And he was known. He came from a wealthy family. He was well known. That they're going to carve up his face with all these different diagrams, stab him a certain way around his heart, and then even partially put out his right eye. I don't know. And that whoever did it had gloves, because not one fingerprint was found in that car, which had blood in it. And you could think, you touch something, you're killing the guy, you're trying to get out of the car, you're dumping the body. No fingerprints. So yeah. And then a few years later, the guy gets acquitted. The Supreme Court of Pennsylvania gives him another trial. He gets I guess I can't remember, but for lack of basically, because remember, at the end of the day, the ones that they blame was the dead guy, Armstrong, who's dead. He's the one that did it. And they were hanging out there. What do you think? What do you think? Who was this guy, was he a ritual killing? Or was it a mix of everything? Good question, huh? Was the story that they gave out, were they hired as a hit team to take him out, like what Henry was saying by the family, who were saying, this guy, he's sinful, he's going to embarrass the family, and God knows what else. Remember, in the other family member Bechtel, if you look at what they're saying, basically they killed her because she was involved and apparently looked like she was in love with a Jewish guy. So that, like, in other words, remember, these are different times, folks. When you step outside what they say, color outside the line, but it's not only that you're going to color outside the line. Remember, these are different times. Whatever you do is going to make us all look bad. This is the time where people had long memories, and you disgraced your family. If you were a disgraceful family to begin with, who cares? But you could tell this family was very well regarded, had deep roots in the community. What was the motive? So anyway, guys, happy Halloween. Don't forget to sign up for my newsletter on SUBSTACK. Go to MiamiGhostChronicles.com, MPPellicer.com. You can find links to everything. I will be back next year. I don't know if you could tell. I sent Henry away because he was losing his voice. We've both been under the weather. Otherwise, we would do the live stream. But as a matter of fact, this is the best I could do. But yeah, it's been it's been a crazy year. But I'll be back next year with another, hopefully, a live stream. But if not, you'll see me at Mardi Gras time. Let's see what happens. And trick or treat. Give me something good to eat. Till next time.